and Merry Christmas to those that celebrate. May Santa bring you many expensive and rare retro bits and pieces this year. So this video is a follow-up to the last one that I did, was building my Windows XP sort of daily driver gaming rig using parts that are not strictly period correct. The idea of this video was to do the same thing for Windows 98. It should have been straightforward, but it wasn't. We'll get into that in a minute, but that's what the video today is all about. So the first plan was this, and this is an AM2 board with a Athlon 64 quad core, I think it is, and a GeForce 6600 GT PCI Express, but I quickly found out that this board does not have any Windows 98 drivers, so I didn't really want to, build something that didn't have the correct drivers for all of the motherboard components, so I had to rethink straight away. So while I was messing about with this AM2 board, I did get some of the legwork done and got it all installed before I found out there were no drivers, but I got all the drives into the case, got Windows 98 installed onto a hard drive and all that kind of thing, but it's a no-go, so I need to go and look for a new graphics card, new motherboard, and see what we can come up with. So the next motherboard I went to, stepping back a generation, is a Socket 939 board from MSI. It's a K8T Neo 2. The board came with some bits and pieces, which is quite nice. So it already had on board an Athlon X2 3200. I know Windows XP won't use the second core, but I'm just going to leave that on there. And it's still got the 1.5 AGP 8x slot, so we can use something pretty powerful for a graphics card. And it also came with 2 gigs of RAM, so that's quite nice. Though we're not going to use that because I've got some nice shiny Guile stuff that looks pretty cool, even though you're not going to be able to see it inside the case. We're going to use that instead of that Corsair Value RAM. The motherboard uses a VIA K8T800 Pro chipset, so we definitely got Windows 98 support there. And we've got 4 PCI slots alongside the AGP slots. I've got some ideas about how to use those to give this machine some insane graphics boosting capabilities. So I've been wanting to use this for a while. My boxed HIS IC Cube, is that how you pronounce that? I'm not sure. It's a Radeon 9800 Pro, so yeah, we've got 128 megs of RAM, 256-bit bus, 8 pixel pipelines, probably a bit too much DirectX 9, which I don't believe Windows 98's great at handling some of the early versions it supports, but I think it's supposed to be a bit flaky. But yeah, this is the card of choice, for at least for DirectX graphics. So alongside this, I'm going to run another one of my prized possessions graphics cards, and that's this. This is my Voodoo 4500 PCI, quite rare. So this is going to sit alongside the 9800 Pro, and this will cover, I think it's only a DirectX 6 card, but we want it for Glide, not for DirectX. It's got 32 megs of RAM, supports 32-bit color, unlike the Voodoo 3, so it should make a nice little companion for the 9800 Pro. It's got its original fan, but I don't quite trust it, so I'm going to remove it and keep it somewhere safe, and we're going to pop on this Noctua fan, so I don't have to worry about it seizing up and frying the card. And for sound, as usual with Windows 98, we're going to stick with our Sound Blaster Live. This is the slightly nicer model, not the value model that's got the gold-plated jacks instead of the multicolored plastic ones. So you can't really go wrong with one of these in Windows 98, and that should give us all of our sound goodness. Not good for early DOS, but it'll do for this build. Now, with the components chosen and Windows 98 support assured this time, we can get the stuff built. So pop the processor on there with the stock AMD cooling fan and pop in our nice shiny Guile memory. It's a shame you can't see the stuff because it looks rather cool. Got this in blue as well, metallic blue heat spreaders on my other set. It's very nice looking stuff. It's PC 3200, aka DDR2 400, which is the fastest this motherboard supports, and it's dual channel as well. I guess just the way that stuff gets allocated to memory, Windows 98 should probably benefit from the speediness of that as well. And now we can get stuff into the case. One disappointing thing about this motherboard was that the seller said it came with its I/O panel, and it came with an I/O panel, but not the one for this motherboard, which was a bit disappointing. The case is one that I've used before. If you didn't watch the video where I had a look at it, we'll have another little quick look once it's all put together, but it's a nice black case with some funky LEDs. Okay, the drivers are already in the box, so we've got the motherboard and all the bits and pieces in, and yes, that is not the graphics card we're using. That is an FX 5200 I just popped in quickly to test it out, but we're ready to rock and roll, I think. So we pause now for an unboxing video. This is a complete in-box card that I got about 5 years ago, so I think it was even quite reasonably priced. I don't know what I paid for it, £35 or something like that. Probably considerably more expensive now, as everything seems to be. But yeah, look at that. You can even see it through a little window before you open the box. But inside, everything is there. All the manuals, all of the cables, some of them little cables haven't even been opened. And the card itself, this is where we moved into chunky, big dual slot cards, like everything is these days. But yeah, it's very nice and should make a nice little companion to this build and should be able to blitz anything that Windows 98 has to throw at it. And in it goes. I can see straight away that, you know, this is a chunky thing and it's going to be a tight squeeze to get the other two cards in alongside it. But yeah, we'll see. So with the big one in the machine, it's time to take a look at the little one. So we're going to sort this fan out, get this nice original 3DFX fan off, try and keep it preserved, and put this Noctua fan on, which I guess is going to be cooler and a bit of peace of mind, because that fan, the original 3DFX fan, when I got the card, was a little bit sticky, and I cleaned it up with some contact cleaner and stuff, and it seems to be okay now, but I don't quite trust it. So yeah, this fan's a little bit thicker, but should be more efficient and keep it cooler as well. The Noctua didn't come with the right connector to run it from the main board of the card, so we just got it hooked up to a Molex, so that's probably a bit safer as well, I guess. And there you go. As I thought, it's a bit of a squeeze. The Sound Blaster's right up against the 9800 Pro, but doesn't cover the fan, so I think that'll be okay. And then there's a little bit of space for the Voodoo to suck up some air as well. So theoretically, that should be it. And it's just a case of getting the drivers on, and we should be good to go. So, you will remember at the beginning of this video, despite the fact that everything seems to have gone smoothly so far, I did say that this build was a pain in the arse when it shouldn't have been, and this is where the fun and games begin. So everything's installed correctly on this machine as far as I can tell, and I went to do some benchmarking on 3D Mark using 2000 and 2001, and neither one of them would run. It would start, it would either freeze or kick you out the program, and a bit more experimentation. Basically anything where you try to run any kind of 3D stuff would bomb out, which was a bit of a pain. I scratched my head over this for a long time. I went through a whole bunch of different drivers, different versions of the driver. I'm pretty sure it's got something to do with the AGP driver. I'm guessing it's something to do specifically with the AGP driver and Windows 98. Now, probably going to revisit this at some point, but I'm going to bet money that if I loaded the XP drivers for this motherboard, it would work. But I couldn't figure out what was going on, so I just kept on installing different versions of drivers and nothing was changing. A bit of Googling. VIA is notorious for this. So VIA AGP driver issues going back into earlier chipsets as well. So I'm going to guess it's something to do with that. But it really did bring the whole build to a halt, and so I just had nowhere to go. I couldn't run any 3D on it, despite the fact that everything seemed to be running normally. It's perfectly happy doing simple stuff like on the Windows desktop. So I had to go away and have another think. At first I thought it might be my 9800 Pro on the way out, but I've got this 9600 XT, so I dropped that in and that worked same, so it kept on hanging, so it wasn't a graphics card issue. I also tried it with a 9800 SE and FX 5200 and a few other graphics cards, all AGP8 ones, all with the same issue, so at least it's not a problem. In fact, when I was kind of looking at this card, I thought because it's so much smaller than the 9800, it might actually be a better bet for the case. It, obviously slower, but it's probably still more than enough for Windows 98. So in the end, I just figured I have to try another motherboard. I tried just about everything else and figured it had to be the drivers, and it just didn't like anything I was getting for Windows 98 off the net, so went and had a dig through my motherboard collection and came up with this one. So what we have here is an ASRock K7S 41GX, and this is powered by the SIS 741GX chipset. We've gone back a generation again, so we're back to socket 462, aka socket A, and yeah, we'll see if we can get this one working. It's still got its 1.5 volt 8x AGP, so we'll still be able to use the same graphics cards, and yeah, we'll see how it goes. There's a couple of not so good things about this board. The maximum memory speed it can take is the 333 DDR2, so I'm going to leave the 400 in there, but it'll only be running at 333. Processor wise, obviously we're not going to be able to use the same processor as the socket 939, so we've got an Athlon XP 3200, still should be a good performer with Windows 98. And the last thing is it's a micro ATX motherboard, so whereas the cards were squeezed in the other motherboard, the MSI one, they're going to be even more squeezed in this one, so I hope there's enough airflow. Unfortunately, the 9800 Pro just does not fit in this build, so despite wanting to use it, I can't use it anymore. So the choices were a bunch of NVIDIA FX cards, which are probably all rubbish, and I've got the 9600 XT and the 9800 SE, though it's the 256-bit bus version, so I think they're pretty much on a par with each other, those two, and both faster than the FX cards that I've got. I think it's the 5600 was the fastest I've got there. So I'm going to go with the 9800 SE, just because it seems to be the most solidly built out of all of them. And then all three cards do just squeeze in together, though the back of the sound card is very close to the fan of the graphics card. Hopefully there'll be enough airflow there. I've got the big fan at the back blowing cool air in and across the case. The case has little holes in the side of it, so I think it should be good for airflow. I put the Voodoo at the bottom with lots of space, so that gets a lot of air, despite the fact that it's probably, I don't know if it might be cooler or hotter than the 9800 SE, but hopefully that will be fine. But we'll find out when we do benchmarking to see if anything artifacts or anything like that. Everything's in the case and we're firing it up and see how we go this time. So for those of you that hadn't seen the case before, here it is in its glory. I've got a blue LED fan in there which wasn't in there before, so we've got these little air holes all down the sides and it gives a nice little blue glow kind of coming out of those, and it's got a funky little blue LED on the front. It's got a switch to turn that on and off underneath the USB flap at the bottom, so I'll leave a link about the video I made about this case when I first got it on Facebook Marketplace if anybody's interested. But fingers crossed, let's see if we can get some AGP drivers working on this version of the build. I loaded the drivers for the new SIS chipset and they all seem to go on correctly, and the first thing that happened was I ran into exactly the same problem where it was freezing in 3D Mark, only luckily this time reverting to earlier versions of the AGP driver did solve the problem. So there's definitely something going on. It's possible that there's an older driver on the MSI motherboard that I just didn't find when I was Googling that might have sorted out the problem. Anyway, it works and 3D Mark went through okay, did a few other tests, ran some games benchmarks and what have you, and we have a working system. So it's all new having two graphics cards in the machine. I've never done it before and found out a couple of cool things on the way. So at the minute the Voodoo's plugged into the monitor with a VGA cable and the Radeon's plugged in using a DVI cable, so they're both plugged in at the same time. Now, as soon as you do that and you boot up, the BIOS recognises that there's two graphics cards there, and then there's this option which wasn't there when I had one card in, which must get enabled when you do that, and that allows you to choose whether you want to run your primary graphics adapter from AGP or PCI. So this will be the thing that I need to do when I'll only be using one card at a time, probably to play a whole game, so I won't be doing it often, but you'll have to come in and set it to AGP if I want to do my direct 3D stuff, or if I'm playing a Glide game I'd have to come in and set it to PCI, but I thought it was quite a cool little feature. We got here in the end. We've got a system that's stable now, but it's taken 3 motherboards to get here. One of them didn't get off the ground because there was no drivers. I'm going to have another look at that MSI board at some point. Just might even do a little video about you know, whether Windows 98 really is supported by things, later boards that say they support it and that kind of thing, but we'll see. So on to benchmarking. So the way I'm going to do this is 3D Mark 2000, and I'm going to use the Dungeon Siege benchmark. I was going to use 3D Mark 2001, but I thought that might be a bit harsh on the Voodoo, but Dungeon Siege is also a DirectX 8.1 game, and DirectX 8.1 is the version I'm going to put on here. I've heard some different things about DirectX and Windows 98. Some people say don't go beyond 7. I think it officially supported up to 9.0C, but only certain versions, certain early builds of 9.0C, so I figure somewhere in the middle, 8.1 should be okay. And I didn't think it was worth running two DirectX 8.1 benchmarks, so we're just going to do Dungeon Siege alongside 3D Mark 2000, and then we're going to do Unreal Tournament, because I think it's about the only thing I can think of where you can actually compare Glide performance with Direct 3D performance, so it'll be interesting to see that on the Voodoo card. Since I wasn't really comparing anything directly, I didn't necessarily run the same resolutions and things. Obviously wouldn't make sense to do that. So I ran the Radeon at 1280 by 1024, 32-bit color, and that just annihilated everything. So it's like in the helicopter game, even at high detail, it was like 110 frames a second, and in the adventure game, it was 86 frames a second. So that was gobbling up everything that 3D Mark 2000 could throw at it. For the Voodoo, I did start it with 1280 by 1024 and 32-bit color, and well, it struggled obviously. So it was getting kind of 20, 15, and high detail it was like 7 in the helicopter game. So I dropped it to 1024 by 768 for the Voodoo 32-bit color, and it was a bit more respectable, but it was still only sort of 16, 17 frames a second for the high detail game benchmarks. So yeah, the Radeon got an overall score of 12,102 in 3D Mark 2000, and the Voodoo got a score of 1,101, but not really a fair comparison. But this is a Direct 3D benchmark, and it's the Radeon that I got to play Direct 3D on and will be using for all the Direct 3D games, so that's a pretty good performance. I think that should certainly do most Windows 98 games more than justice. So Dungeon Siege was a different kettle of fish altogether. It was quite difficult one to set up. I couldn't get it to go above 800 by 600 in the benchmark for the Voodoo. It was actually freezing the screen anything beyond that. So at 800 by 600 it was giving 24 frames a second average, but couldn't test it beyond that. Would you want to, because it's barely playable as it is, but that's not really unexpected, I guess. The Radeon, I didn't bother benching it higher than 800 by 600, but even that was getting 41 frames a second average in this game, so yeah, it must be quite demanding, I guess. The Radeon came out roughly the same time as this game, though I don't think the 9800 SE was really a gaming card for the high frame rates. The 9800 Pro would have probably killed this as well, but good enough, I guess. So realistically, if I was going to play a game like Dungeon Siege, I probably would be playing it on an XP machine with much faster everything and get much better performance. So I benched Unreal Tournament at 1024 by 768, 32-bit color, and the Radeon got an average frame rate of 73.3, so that's pretty okay. And the Voodoo was interesting because I could bench that in both Glide and in Direct 3D. So at 1024 by 768, 32-bit color Direct 3D, the Voodoo was getting 44 frames a second, so it's playable for sure. But changing it to Glide at the same resolution, you got a little bit of a gain there, so it was 50 frames a second average with Glide, and it did look noticeably nicer, I think, in Unreal Tournament. So that's what I got the two cards in there for, was to do that kind of stuff and get that fabulous Glide goodness when I want it. So there we have it. The build is done. It was a bit of a pain getting there. But yeah, we've got a reasonably performing Direct 3D system. Not as high as I would like. I'm a bit gutted for not getting my 9800 Pro in there. It's a shame. I've got other socket A boards, but they don't have the 8x AGP slot that I would like. So I'm going to hang on, and maybe at some point I'll get something to upgrade. But in the meantime, it'll do the job. Not as fast as the 9800 Pro, but the 9800 SE should handle most Windows 98 games. Got the option to drop into Glide with the Voodoo, which is very nice, and that will probably handle some of the later DOS games that perhaps don't need some of the old sound card stuff like OPL and things like that. But I think that covers pretty much all the bases for Windows 98, which was the aim of the game. So that's pretty much it. I hope you enjoyed taking this winding journey with me to get to this point. So this machine will go alongside my Windows XP machine, and I think I'm all set for my retro gaming. I'll not touch this machine again, apart from possibly upgrading the motherboard. And I guess I still have to create something for early DOS games. I might look at that at some point in the near future as well. So that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed watching it, and I hope you'll join me for the next one. Thanks for watching. Bye.